I mean, there aren't many jobs available to a single mother, right?
When I told the interviewer that I was parenting a child on my own, his entire tone shifted. He snickered, tossed my resume on the desk, and asked no further inquiries. I wanted to do my best for my child, but the things I had to protect kept me from moving forward. My name is Luna Green. I am a single mother with a son in high school. I had my son Theodore 16 years ago. I was only 22 years old. Theodore was the child of my boyfriend at that time. I was so happy when I found out I was pregnant. Since I was raised in an institution and had been alone my entire life, I assumed I would finally have a true family. I showed my boyfriend the ultrasound image I had received from the hospital.
Good for you.
He was so happy. He was a gambler with no money, but I expected that to change after we had children and married. But
I'm going out to buy cigarettes.
And he never came back. Even if I looked for him and found him, I knew he'd never be a father. So I decided at that moment that I would raise my child alone. I was working as a graphic designer. But being a designer required me to work long hours, and I felt that my body was not up to the effort, so I stopped. Even if I lost my job, I would still have my skills. I thought I would have no trouble finding a new job, but the reality was different. After Theodore was born, I started looking for a new job while using a daycare center. When people looked at my resume and portraits, the response was positive. However, since I wasn't young.
Are you married? Do you have children?
That was always a topic of conversation. I'm a single mother. When I told that to the interviewers, their attitudes changed dramatically.
Well, in that case, I think it would be difficult for us to hire you.
A single parent with a small child. They assumed I had to leave early or be absent frequently from work. That's why the interviewers didn't want to hire me. But I had to work to raise Theodore. Undeterred, I went to several interviews. Then, one day,
I mean, there aren't many jobs available to a single mother, right?
The interviewer snickered and threw away my resume. I was doing everything I could for my child, yet the only reason I wasn't hired was because of him. My savings were running low, and I couldn't be picky about the kind of work I desired. I started working part-time to make some quick money. But when Theodore got sick, I had to leave early or miss work all the time, and I was dismissed after only 6 months. So I moved from one part-time job to another. As Theodore grew older, he became less prone to illness, and I settled for a part-time job as a cashier at a supermarket. I had been working there for 11 years and had dealt with the customers who waited in line at the cash register every day. Despite the fact that I had been doing this for a long time, my hourly income had only risen by 30 cents. Before I knew it, Theodore was a high school student.
I'll work when I get out of high school.
Seeing Theodore talk like that, I assumed he was suffering as well. Theodore loved to study. He was one of the top students in his grade. It would be a shame for him not to go to college. However, because I was working as a cashier at a supermarket, the family's finances remained problematic. I decided to push myself again and look for a full-time job. I had experience as a designer and several part-time jobs. I reasoned that my talents as a designer would give me a greater chance. I had an interview with a small design company. The interviewer looked at my portrait and resume, which I hadn't pulled out in over a decade.
This is wonderful.
That's what he said after looking at it.
Given your professional background, we'd love to work with you.
But I'm not sure if I'm rusted or not.
The basic operation of the application is the same.
I was relieved to hear that. And I was back on the road to becoming a full-time employee. My new employment was with a company that created restaurant flyers. There were 15 people in the design department, including me. A young woman named Mia was assigned to teach me how to do my job. She was beautiful and popular among male employees, but she was very cold to me. "You don't have good taste." She was always stingy with my designs. She said I had bad taste and that my designs were out of date. She always criticized me. The male staff were on Mia's side, flattering her. Only Joseph, a man in his 60s, was different. For example, one day, "The information you provided does not correspond to the order number." "Excuse me, but you were the one who gave me the number." "Are you trying to say I'm wrong?" When Mia raised her voice, the male employees gathered around. "Luna made an error with her task." And Mia started to cry. But the truth was different. Mia received a phone call and instructed me by email. However, Mia blamed it on me, saying, "She's saying that it's my fault." I was completely turned into a villain. The male employees looked at me like I was a bad person. When I was at a loss for what to do,
Let me check the email.
Joseph offered me a helping hand.
Oh, well, by seeing the email from you, Mia, it looks like you placed the order of 300.
When Joseph pointed this out, Mia looked embarrassed. "I must have been mistaken." She looked unconvinced, but this proved my innocence. Mia, on the other hand, not only blamed me for her mistakes, but she even informed her superiors that the design concepts I received credit for were her own. That was fine with me because I enjoyed doing design work and wasn't looking for praise. But she seemed to be spreading bad rumors about me within the office. She seemed to be circulating stories about my careless interactions with guys, and the male colleagues were increasingly unfriendly to me. Joseph was the only one who was on my side, and he was quite understanding about Mia's bullying of me. Eventually, I became so isolated that I could not talk to anyone in the department except Joseph. I asked others about things I didn't understand, but no one would help me. I was concerned that if things continued in this manner, it would have an impact on my work. Little by little, my anxiety built up. Because no one would assist me, my work got increasingly slow, and I was forced to work more and more overtime. "Sorry, Theodore, I'm going to be late again today." When I told Theodore this over the phone, he helped me prepare dinner, and so on. This was unthinkable when he was a little boy, and I felt that my son had grown up. When I hung up the phone, Joseph was standing behind me. I believed he had a day off that day. I asked him what was wrong.
I forgot something.
He replied, and Joseph extended me a cup of coffee.
Was that your son?
He knew I was talking with someone on the phone. I answered yes, and we made small talk. When he asked about my son, I couldn't help but praise him. I told him that he was at the top of his class and that he was choosing a prep school to take the entrance exam. But to be honest, taking exams is expensive, right? I told Joseph that I wasn't certain that Theodore would be able to follow his heart's path. Then,
Don't worry about it.
Joseph replied. I didn't understand why he said that, so I wanted to ask him what he meant, but...
Well, I shall get going.
And he left the room. Joseph claimed to have forgotten something, yet he left empty-handed. I wondered whether he had stopped by to check on me, and the thought made me feel a little warm. The next day, as soon as I came at work, I was summoned to Mr. Nelson's office, our CEO's office. I had only met Mr. Nelson once before joining the company, and yet I was summoned to his office. Considering my recent situation, I was afraid he would fire me. My heart was racing when such a notion crossed my thoughts. When I entered Mr. Nelson's office, for some reason, Mia and Joseph were there. And of course, Mr. Nelson was there too. I was afraid that my reputation had been transferred through Mia and that I would be dismissed. I clenched my fists and waited for Mr. Nelson's words. Then, he said something unexpected.
I have been looking for you.
I didn't know what it meant, so... Excuse me? I replied without thinking. Confused, I unconsciously asked Joseph for help. Then,
Let me explain it to you.
Joseph started speaking. Mr. Nelson turned out to be the father of my ex, who vanished when I told him I was pregnant.
I am the CEO's brother.
Joseph was Mr. Nelson's brother. Then how did he end up in the design department? More importantly, I couldn't believe that Mr. Nelson was my ex's father. That meant he was Theodore's grandfather. My mind couldn't catch up with all the information that came in at once. May I ask how he's doing? I asked Mr. Nelson. Even though I was confused, it bothered me. It wasn't like I wanted to be with him again. But for Theodore, he was his father. I wanted Theodore to meet him, if possible. In response to my question, Joseph silently shook his head. I guessed what he was going to say.
My son is a gambling addict.
Mr. Nelson opened his mouth. I knew he was a gambler, but I had no idea he was addicted to it. He got into gambling troubles, and Mr. Nelson had to pay a large sum of money on his behalf. But he couldn't stop gambling, so Mr. Nelson had to cut ties with him. But a few years ago, he passed away quietly in his apartment. Since it was his own son, Mr. Nelson expressed regret for abandoning him rather than reaching out to him. Then, while going through his possessions, Mr. Nelson came upon an old ultrasound photograph of Theodore. When Mr. Nelson looked at it, he realized he might have a grandchild.
I asked an investigation company to look into it and finally found out the result yesterday.
Perhaps that was the reason Joseph took yesterday off.
Luna, I didn't expect that you were the one he was looking for.
Joseph laughed.
And there is one more thing I would like to discuss with you.
Pulling back his smile, Joseph changed the subject. This time, Mr. Nelson stepped out and approached Mia. Mia, who had been gazing perplexed the entire time, became nervous when Mr. Nelson approached her. Mr. Nelson then told Mia that she would be transferred to the General Affairs Department. Why me?
Until recently, the design department was a place where new employees, particularly women, did not last long.
That's why Joseph, who who had originally been working behind the scenes, had come in to investigate the internal situation. After I joined the company, Joseph saw with his own eyes all of Mia's misdeeds and reported that she was the cause of them. In this company, the General Affairs Department was a hangout for arrogant senior female employees. I was certain Mia's method would not work.
You can leave now.
Mr. Nelson said to Mia. Mia left Mr. Nelson's office with a frustrated look on her face. And then,
Well,
Mr. Nelson turned to me.
I'm sorry about my son.
With that, Mr. Nelson handed me a brown envelope. When I took it and looked inside, I found it was stuffed full of money. I can't accept this. I tried to return it in a hurry, but
It's not from me.
Mr. Nelson said.
It's from my son.
That was what he said. The ultrasound image of the baby was in that envelope too. He also discovered pay stubs and other paperwork indicating that his son had been working hard for several years prior to his death. Because the photograph was in the package, he had to have left the money for us, for me and Theodore. But he abandoned us. That's the kind of person I thought he was. To be honest, there were times I resented him. I hated him, and yet,
My son has his flaws. You may call me an idiot, but he had a gentle side as well.
Mr. Nelson told me. I couldn't stop crying hearing those words. Only the good memories of my youth come back to me, but I knew I couldn't see him again. The thought of that made my heart tighten even more. Mr. Nelson then told me that he wanted to see my son. I agreed, but I also needed Theodore's consent, so I asked him directly. I told Theodore that his father had passed away, and I also told him that he had a grandfather and an uncle.
If it's just meeting them, I don't mind.
He was not all excited about the idea because he was an adolescent. But once they met, they seemed to get along perfectly, and Theodore and Mr. Nelson became fast friends. Now they are so close that they even go fishing together. Joseph has also disciplined the staff who had been disrespectful to me, and the design department is now at peace. I was also entrusted with more and more work, and I began to feel a positive response. Theodore will be able to attend college, thanks to the money my ex gave me and Mr. Nelson's assistance. To be honest, there were times when I felt like giving up. But I'm glad I decided to have a baby, even though I was alone at the time. Now I have Theodore, who is my treasure, and a career that is quite gratifying. The decision I made at that time was definitely the right one. I am so happy now that I can proudly say so.
My name is Owen. I am a senior about to graduate from college who was fortunate to obtain a job offer before the summer. I am living a relaxed life at home while working part-time. However, my mother is a strict person. Owen, don't you just chill around? Don't you have anything to prepare for your new job? I was afraid she'd say something like that to me, so I attempted to make my days meaningful in my own way. I attempted to read books on salesmanship because I was going to work in sales for the company I was offered a job with. I also went on a solo foreign trip for a few days to meet people from different countries. I thought my conservative mother was a pain in the ass many times since I was a kid, but I've grown to appreciate her more recently. On a hot summer day like today, I always remember something. I recall the day I met him being similarly hot. As I was leaving my house to go to the library that day, I was thinking about it. I spotted a luxurious-looking black automobile parked in front of an apartment building near my home at the moment. I cast a sidelong glance and noticed a man in a black suit in the blazing sun. He was wearing a flashy shirt inside and standing next to the car. He seemed to be looking at me. Why is he here? He must be one of the mafia, I guess. This flat is old. Perhaps they'll demolish it and use it as a hideout or something. If so, it's a little sad and at the same time scary. No one has lived in their apartment for a long time now. But it was a sight that held some emotional significance for me. Anyway, let's get out of here. That's what I thought and started to walk quickly. But...
Excuse me?
I heard a voice. It was a very low male voice, and because there was only myself and the mafia guy here, I immediately understood who he was talking to. What? Why me? I wanted to run away, but I was afraid of being chased, so I could only turn around and respond. Yes, can I help you? I responded while avoiding eye contact with him as much as possible. Then,
I'm looking for someone.
He began to speak in a surprisingly calm voice. Is he looking for someone that resembles him in appearance? I've never seen such a frightening person around here, I thought to myself. Okay. I had no choice but to listen to what he had to say.
I'm looking for Miller's house.
When I heard him say that, I froze. Miller, that was my last name. But I had no idea why the mafia would be looking for us. Were there any Millers out there that I was unaware of? I didn't know what to say, and I was clearly panicking. The guy then stared me in the eyes as if he felt I was suspicious. Oh my God. But I was sure I didn't do anything wrong, as I remained frozen in place.
Owen Miller?
He mentioned my name. What? When he spoke my name, my heart practically leaped out of my chest. But the eyes I saw through his sunglasses peering in at me were not so frightening. So I felt a little better. Then the mafia took off his sunglasses and said,
I'm Henry Williams. Don't you remember me?
He spoke a little nervously. What? Henry? Hearing those words, I was more and more surprised. Because that was the person I had been thinking about just a moment ago. It was the summer of 15 years ago. I was a timid and quiet boy. I had friends, but not many, and I was not bullied. However, instead of playing in the schoolyard at recess, I would read books in the classroom. So I didn't know much about the big, quiet Henry who was in a class a little bit away from me. I only had the impression that he was a scary person. I wasn't the only one who thought so, and most of the students at the time undoubtedly did so too and avoided him. I thought that I would never get involved with him either, but one day on my way home, I wanted to show my mother the family portrait I had drawn in school. I was running towards home, clutching a piece of drawing paper in my hand. However, I tripped on a pebble and fell, letting go of the drawing paper in the process. The paper was blown away by the wind and landed in the riverbed just next to me. I dashed after it, but I was unable to catch it in time, and the paper fell into the river. Fortunately, it did not sink and was floating on the surface of the water. I stepped into the river to retrieve it. Then, "Hey, what are you doing?" I heard a loud voice from above the riverbed. I looked up in surprise and saw Henry there. "What?" I was surprised to hear him talking to me, and in no time at all, Henry was down the riverbed and beside me. I told him what happened. "You're short, so I'll go get it." And he went into the river. Even Henry, who was probably 20 centimeters taller than me, was knee-deep in the water. So, if I had been in the water, it would have been very dangerous. I thanked Henry for bringing the painting back safely. The drawing was slightly blurred, but not so much that I couldn't recognize it. Following that, I walked home for the first time with Henry, who appeared to be heading in the same direction. I remember being pleased that Henry seemed to recognize me, despite the fact that I was a quiet guy. Because I was a simple guy, I felt drawn to him just for that and began to be friends with him. Henry was silent, but he didn't ignore me, and he answered every question I posed to him. "What kind of picture do you draw?" I was talking about the picture of my family that he picked up earlier. Henry didn't change his expression much and showed me the drawing silently. There was a man with a beard, dressed in green, drawn on it. "Is he your father?" I asked him, and he nodded his head. I was a little surprised. I sketched myself, my mother, and my father in my family portrait. I assumed that because I had been told to draw family, I was obliged to draw every member of the family. That's why I was surprised to learn that the picture of Henry didn't even include Henry himself. Looking back, I see this was a mirror of Henry's family situation, but I couldn't have known it at the time. We became closer and closer, and we started walking to and from school together. We were in the same class when we moved up a grade, so we became increasingly close. The more I got to know Henry, the more I began to notice that he was being avoided by his classmates. Aside from the big and scary impression he gave, the kids seemed to think Henry was poor and filthy. It was true that Henry seemed to have only about 2 pieces of clothing. So there were hairballs and small holes in his clothes. To be honest, I didn't really notice it. When Henry came to our house several times, my mother said, "Henry, let me see your t-shirt." Henry didn't seem to understand what my mother was talking about. But once Henry removed his t-shirt, my mother brought out her sewing box and put my father's t-shirt on him. At that moment, I immediately understood. She was patching the holes in the t-shirt. By the time Henry was leaving, the t-shirt had been so meticulously repaired that you couldn't tell there were any holes in it. "Look at you! Now you are more handsome than ever!" Mom smiled as she patted Henry on the back as he put on the mended t-shirt. Henry looked so happy, which made me happy too. Later, I heard that Henry's family was a father-son family and they lived together. His father, a civil engineering worker, left early in the morning and returned late at night. He never cooked at home, and instead, they usually ate ready-made meals from a supermarket. Furthermore, Henry was generally sleeping when his father arrived home. So Henry ate ready-made food in the morning, bought food at the school cafeteria, and skipped dinner. He always lived like that. When my mother heard this from Henry, she started to cook dinner for Henry every day. I was overjoyed as an only child since I felt like I had a brother, and can I really eat something as gorgeous as this? Henry's eyes sparkled with delight, but my mother was not always this kind. She began to scold Henry in the same way she scolded me. Owen, Henry, did you do your homework? My mother came into my room and stated this when we were playing video games together as usual in my room. I haven't. I'll do it later. We weren't in the mood to do it. Don't put off everything. If you do what needs to be done first, you'll have more time to enjoy the fun stuff. With that, I reluctantly took out my textbooks from my school bag. But Henry said, I'll do it when I get home, and was still playing video games. Then, my mother stood in front of the TV and said, I'm sure you won't do it if you're alone, right? It's better for both of you to do your homework now, Henry. Get out your textbooks. Henry was powerless in the face of her intensity. Okay. And with that, he stopped playing the game and started doing his homework. In this way, we spent our time together like a real family. We will always spend time together like this. I had that concept someplace in my head. But back in the summer, when we were in 5th grade at elementary school, Henry moved to live with his grandfather, who lived far away after leaving his busy father. We considered Henry to be a member of our family, but we couldn't disagree with what his biological family had decided. On the first day of summer vacation, Henry came to say goodbye to me. I could only hold back my tears and say goodbye. My mother hugged Henry with tears streaming down her face. Your place is here. We will always be on your side. You'll be okay wherever you go. I'm sure you will be able to live powerfully and compassionately. I assure you that. My mother told him. Henry was looking down, but maybe he was crying. Finally, I also said to Henry, I hope you will come back here. That was all I could say as I waved Henry goodbye with a wide smile. After that, Henry came to see me during the winter and spring vacations. But after that, I lost communication with Henry, and I had no idea how he was doing for the next 15 years. When I saw Henry, I was more surprised than happy. I'm glad to see you're doing well. Henry grinned at me, despite the fact that he had fresh wounds on his cheekbones and the sides of his eyes. But it was still the same Henry. You seem to be doing fine too, Henry, I replied. How's your mom doing? I came here today to thank your family. He said so. Oh, she's fine. She's just at home. So why don't you stop by? When Henry told me to get in his car, I did so nervously. After that, he parked it in a nearby lot. The inside of Henry's car, which I was riding in for the first time, smelled like the city, and I understood that time had passed once more. From there, we walked a few minutes to my house. The exterior of the house was very different from back then because it had been remodeled. So that's why I didn't notice it, said Henry. And when I opened the door of the house, my mother noticed me. Huh? Why are you you back so soon? I thought you went to the library. Did you forget something?" With that, she came out. Then she noticed Henry standing behind me and looked at him, blown away. Whether she realized that this man was Henry or not, she remained standing still. "It's been a while. I'm Henry Williams." Henry said his name the same way he said it to me. "I knew it! Henry! Come in, come in!" She knew it, so she recognized him. My mother urged us into the living room. There, Henry told us the story from the day we parted until today. The junior high school children in the place where he relocated were really aggressive, very different from here. People began to notice Henry as a junior high school student because he was tall and muscular. Although he did not have any desire to be strong in fights or anything like that, at school, he was still feared and avoided as he was in elementary school. The only people who would speak to him were rough guys who were doing bad things. Henry got terrified of loneliness as a result of his days with us and began hanging out with terrible companions. He became a member of the mafia through a friend by the time he graduated from high school. He stated that he is fine with it because the mafia world was more humanitarian than he had thought. But he said he still felt uncomfortable about coming to see us, his family, as a person who had taken the outlaw path.
"I was always worried that you would be disappointed. My childhood here was a treasure to me, and I was afraid of ruining it. But today, I was passing by, and I just thought..."
In contrast to his frightening appearance, Henry appeared worried and weak. The world Henry described was extremely different from mine as a typical college student. I didn't know what to say to him. We were meant to be the same age, 22, but our lives have been utterly different up until now. "What are you talking about?" That's what my mom said. Henry raised his dropped look and focused his gaze on my mother at the sound of her words. "You chose this path yourself, didn't you? If you believe in it, you don't need to feel guilty." Saying that, she squeezed Henry's hand. "Besides, I told you, we'll be waiting for you no matter what. We will always be a family, no matter what you do, as long as you're yourself." My mother spoke in the same calm tone she had used previously. Henry was looking down when he heard that. However, I believe he was crying, since his shoulders were trembling so wildly. Seeing that, I was about to cry too. Henry was frightening at first glance, but I imagine it must have been difficult for him to carry so much on his own. "Welcome back, Henry," I said. I put my hand on Henry's shoulder. It had been 15 years since the three of us had spent this much time together, but I felt comfortable. 5 years have passed since then. I am now 27 years old and recently got married to a woman I met at work. She is expecting a baby in 6 months. And Henry, it appears, left the mafia family as well. He started working as a civil engineering worker just like his father once did. He and his girlfriend got married 2 years ago. At the same time, they had a child. They have a beautiful 2-year-old daughter and a newborn baby born 2 months ago. Since we now live in the same state, we get together at my parents' house during the holiday season as a family. He has more experience as a father than I do, so I have a lot to learn from him. Despite his size and imposing features, he smiles broadly in front of his children. I wonder if I will become like him. My mother says, I am so happy to have so many grandchildren, and smiles. I am sure I could never have made her smile like that by myself. Meeting Henry has definitely supported our family. He is like a best friend and a brother to me, and he is a very important member of our family. We don't say it out loud, but I hope I am like that to him as well. Our family will continue to work hand in hand. I like to share small happiness with everyone and turn it into great happiness.